Wasabi guys, coming back at you with another Commander Top 10 video. This time we are going to be looking at the best equipment cards in the Commander format. If you're not familiar with my top 10 videos, I do prefer cards that are more fundamentally sound rather than cards that are just meant for big plays, flashy plays, things that are going to impress the Timmy players. I typically go for cards that are going to see play in a lot more decks more often than not, because they just make decks better by being in them. Before I actually get into the top 10 here, I have to go over some honorable mentions. We have Quite a Spike and World Slayer. These cards are great if you're able to deal damage. Now, that is true for a lot of equipment on this list. They're really good when you're able to connect. However, these don't really do anything else. I mean, giving Death Touch with Quite a Spike isn't really all that impressive. It doesn't really give it protection. It doesn't give it indestructibility. It doesn't do anything else. And World Slayer is just something that forces your opponents to block. It doesn't really do anything else spectacular. You have to connect in order to have anything significant happen. They can be very devastating if you play them at the right time. Other than that, they're more than likely going to be dead. Umezawa's Jita and Basilisk Collar are quite underwhelming in this format if they're not in the right deck. The Jita mainly being used in a deck like, say, Karlov, that can take advantage of gaining life and getting more +1/+1 counters, and the Basilisk Collar is usually in combination with something like a Goblin Sharpshooter that can combo and kill all your opponent's creatures. However, aside from those specific decks, these are rather underwhelming and they don't really do anything significant. I mean, Death Touch and Lifelink are good static abilities to have on a lot of creatures. It doesn't really give anything else other than that, and we have a ton of creatures that already have Death Touch and Lifelink that don't need equipment. It's rather underwhelming in most Voltron builds, and it's usually not going to be a consideration unless you can abuse it. Then we have two new equipment here in Bloodforged Battle Axe and Heirloom Blade. These both have a lot of potential here. The Bloodforge, I don't know if it's necessarily going to see more Commander play over time. I definitely like it in something like Cube, where getting more and more power is going to help you win the game easier. And Heirloom Blade is pretty good in tribal-based decks for obvious reasons. Obviously not going to see a lot of play outside of those decks, so it is rather narrow. Blade of the Bloodchief, again, it's not as narrow, and this was very close to actually making the top 10. It got edged out barely, but I feel that it is more or less just a combo card in specific decks like Gave-Guru of Spores or Mazaret Krall Death Priest, where you can abuse the number of +1/+1 counters you can get, and you can combo with something like an Ashnod's Altar and just keep going there. Other than that, though, it's usually going to see play in vampire decks, so it is rather specific, but it barely got edged out. I think it's a lot less narrow than a lot of the other cards I have in the honorable mentions, but it's definitely a card that I feel like you could interchange with my number 10 on here if you don't happen to like the number 10. Then we have Sword of the Meek, Umbral Mantle, and Nim Death Mantle. These are more or less just combo equipment cards. They're not really going to serve a fundamental purpose. I mean, the one you could argue, Nim Death Mantle, could be used in some sort of zombie-based deck or a reanimator build where having a way to bring back more creatures from your graveyard is useful. Other than that, it's more or less just going to be a combo card with Breya. Same thing with Sword of the Meek. And Umbral Mantle is yet another combo piece for any type of deck where you can have a creature that taps for more than 3 mana and you can just keep on tapping it, generate infinite mana. I mean, they're all very powerful equipments, but they're not going to see play in as many decks that don't necessarily depend on combos to win. So let's get on to the actual top 10 here. Number 10, I have Conda's Banner, barely edged out Blade of the Bloodchief in my eyes. The only downside here that I would say you could swap it out for Blade of the Bloodchief would be the fact that it has to be equipped to a legendary creature. That is really its only downside to me. Other than that, though, it is perfect for Commander, where there are a ton of monocolor decks and there are a ton of tribal-based decks, so it isn't necessarily as narrow. It doesn't really serve a purpose for combo-based decks. Very good, and I definitely think it's one of the more undervalued equipment cards as well. The value of Anthem-like effects, it's so important in this format that people, I just don't think, realize it. Tokens are very popular. They're a very popular deck type, but you could also use a lot of anthems to make them good. So why not have a way to give them +2/+2 just by having this equipped to a legendary creature? And on the plus side here, this also works very well in a deck like, say, the Vampire deck for Commander 2017 or the Cat deck, both of which are great options for this type of card, and it just makes so much sense in so many decks. Number 9 is Sword of the Animist. I felt like this card was more popular when it first came out, and then people were kind of like, it's okay, it's not super spectacular, and now people are seeing it again because it got reprinted in the new decks, and they're like, oh wow, this is actually really good. Thinning out your deck over the course of a game just by having the creature attack over and over again, getting more basic lands from your deck that you don't have to draw into, that is extremely underrated and so powerful. You don't miss land drops, and it can give you extra land drops, it can ramp you up, and it's so cheap, it's so efficient, that it's practically an auto-include in multiple Voltron decks, especially ones that are more dependent on equipment, and it is a no-brainer. Number 8 is Conquerors Flail. Just ignore the +1/+1 that you get off the multicolored permanents. Just focus on the fact that you have this Grand Abolisher on an equipment, something that is so desperately needed in multiple Voltron decks, keeping your opponents from responding to your attacks, keeping them from using something like a Swords to Plowshares on your turn. They have to plan on their turn. They have to do things on their turn, or else they're just going to get punched in the face and there's nothing they can do about it. So it's definitely a very powerful, very important card to have in Voltron, and yet again, specifically for decks that are very dependent on equipments, this is a very good equipment to have. Number 7 is all of the swords from the original Mirrodin block and the Scars of Mirrodin block, not named Feast and Famine, for obvious reasons. I mean, that one stands alone. The others are, they're all relatively on the same power level, I feel. You have some that are a little bit better than others, but I just don't really feel any of them kind of stand apart from each other aside from Feast and Famine. But you have ones like War and Peace that kind of deal with hand size, and then you have ones like Fire and Ice that deal with, damage, and you get to draw cards, and then you have Body and Mind, it gets you a token. All of these are rather small. You have Light and Shadow that gets you back a creature from your graveyard. Not too terribly powerful, mainly just lumped together because at their core they give a creature protection from 2 different colors. So in a multiplayer game, you're likely going to be able to find someone that you can swing in uncontested and deal damage and get the triggers off those swords. So very valuable in decks where you want to deal commander damage. They pump the creature up and they give the creature protection. Number 6 is Illusionist Bracers. Has a purpose in so many different decks in this format. For instance, Arcanus the Omnipotent, if you equip this to that dude, he gets to tap and draw you 6 cards instead of just 3. You get to put this in something like Kremko Mob Boss and get even more goblins. You get to throw this into something like, say, the new deck, Marcel the Pretender. If you want to make a deck based around activated abilities, why not throw in an awesome equipment like this? It's cheap, it's affordable. There are a ton of creatures in this format, a ton of commanders with activated abilities that are so devastating, and being able to copy those, essentially just doubling the activated ability, it's going to help you win more games. Number 5 here might seem like a stretch. I might be reaching here. Just let me know. I have Hammer of Nozanne. I was originally going to put a Darksteel plate on this list, and I might as well just say it now as an honorable mention. It didn't make this list because of Hammer of Nozanne. The fact that whenever Hammer of Nozanne or another equipment enters the battlefield, you get to attach it to a creature you control is absolutely insane. It's just 4 mana. You might as well just ignore the equip cost because it's not going to matter. All of your equipment automatically just attaches to a creature when it enters the battlefield. That is insane. It is an auto-include in every single equipment-based deck because of that. Why the hell not? Number 4, I have Sword of Feast and Famine. Easily the best one for commander at the very least. It gives protection from 2 colors, which is always good about the swords. It gives +2/+2, which is also very good. But its triggered ability is awesome. You get to untap all lands you control, and your opponent discards a card. Once you deal combat damage, of course. So it combos with cards that give you extra combat steps if you're able to abuse them. Whatever the enchantment is that allows you to get extra combat steps, it does synergize well with that. It gives you infinite combat steps. And having the protection, you're likely going to win the game at that point, but it's very similar to something like a Bear Umbra. You have to ask yourself, when you compare and contrast from the abilities of the other swords, you compare them to Feast and Famine, you usually think, oh, more mana is definitely going to help me win games. If I can keep my turn going longer, I don't care about drawing a card, I don't care about dealing 2 damage to something, I don't necessarily care about getting a creature back from my graveyard, but if I can untap all of my lands just by connecting with this creature, holy crap, that's going to make my turn go on even longer. It's going to allow me to do more things, and it's an auto include in, yet again, many Voltron decks just because of that. It's extremely powerful, and a lot of people just shit their pants when they see it because it's most likely going to F someone up. Gotta keep it PG-13. Number 3 is Swiftfoot Boots. Now, I know what a lot of you guys are going to say, well, how come you can go from something as epic as a Sword of Feast and Famine to a Swiftfoot Boots? Well, the answer is Hexproof is incredible. You know what else is incredible? Also getting haste. And you can do that at the cost of just 3 mana here, the 2 to play it and the 1 to equip. May seem quite underwhelming seeing this card at the number 3 spot, but it's definitely worth it. It is an auto-include in every single Voltron deck where you are playing multiple different equipment cards, as well as decks that don't depend on other creatures. Obviously, the other card you know it's coming up here soon. Shroud has issues with being able to equip other equipments and attaching auras. It doesn't allow you to do that unless you can unequip it. This allows you to attach equipments and auras whenever you want to, doesn't matter, and giving haste on top of it, super efficient. It is one of the more efficient equipment cards in the format, and it's one of the most played equipment cards in the format as well. It sees play in not just Voltron decks, which is what I must stress. It is not just a card for Voltron decks, it's a card for any deck where your commander is important. It is at least a consideration. Number 2 is Skull Clamp, one of the most powerful cards in the game altogether. It's usually in some sort of combination with tokens, which that can be in so many different decks, not just decks that are dependent on tokens, but decks like Brea where you could just get them out every time you cast her. But all you have to do is just pay that 1 mana and equip it to a creature with 1 toughness, and you draw 2 cards. So 1 mana for 2 cards. It's not Ancestral Recall, but being able to do that over and over again, it's arguably better. So you have this type of utility that you can fit it into literally every deck that plays creatures with 1 toughness. So why the hell not just play it? I mean, it's a combo card, it's a good utility card, it's good consistency, it's going to give you a chance to win games just by looking at more cards, even if you don't choose to put it in a heavy combo deck. It should be an auto-include in multiple decks just for that reason alone. Number 1 is Lightning Greaves. It's pretty much a no-brainer. 2 mana, 0 equip cost, gives a creature Shroud and haste. 2 awesome keywords for just 2 mana. That can fit into literally every deck. The only decks that it might not fit into, you really just have to ask yourself this question: is my commander important? And do I have other ways of protecting my commander, for example, say counter spells? And that's about it. Do you attack with your commander? That's about it as well. You have 2 mana to basically get a swing in with your creature right off the bat. You don't have to pay any equip costs. You have an equipment that just sits on the field, and you play a creature, you get to equip it for free, and it gives it Shroud. So yeah, the downside is obvious. You can't equip any other equipment or attach auras after it's already on there. You have to re-equip it to another creature in order to do that. However, the majority of decks that are going to choose between Swiftfoot Boots and Lightning Greaves, they're more than likely going to go with Lightning Greaves for the fact that it's more efficient, it's quicker. If they have a commander that they get out turn 3, well, let's say they spent their turn 2 playing a Swiftfoot Boots. Well, they can't play their commander turn 3 and then equip the Swiftfoot Boots if they only have that 3 mana to work with, and their commander costs 3 mana. If they have Lightning Greaves, they can equip Lightning Greaves and swing in with their commander that's just 3 mana. While it may not seem like a big deal, like, yeah, you have benefits to Hexproof, but the cheaper and more efficient card is usually going to take the number 1 spot on my lists, especially when it comes to just cards being universally played. This is one of the most universally played cards in the whole format. Well, anyway, guys, that is my top 10 list for the best equipment cards in the Commander format. Let me know what your top 10 are. Let me know if you disagreed with anything on this list. I definitely want to hear you guys' feedback. Check out my other videos if you have not already. I do a ton of other top 10 related videos. I do a lot of deck techs as well, so check those out too. Anyway, Void here signing off. You all have a wonderful day.